So, the nuclear power station. Chernobyl is located in the area between the Ukrainian border and Belarus, as seen on this map right here. This is another image that shows you where Chernobyl is located. We'll talk a little bit more about this map in class tomorrow. Chernobyl nuclear power station was built in 1978 to 1979. This is an image that shows you the nuclear power plant. So this did not happen that long ago, guys. This is another image of the power station from the satellite. We can see the cooling plant. We can see the Prenian River, the Chernobyl power plant, the concrete barriers. So all of these show you. We'll talk about more of this in class and what is the significance of this. But just for now, just look at these images, please. These are more images of the Chernobyl plant. Inside the plant, like I said, tomorrow we'll go ahead and discuss these in more detail. So, the explosion. In early morning hours of April 26, 1986, a testing error caused the explosion at the Chernobyl nuclear power station. These are images of the Chernobyl plant after the explosion. So, radioactive fallout. The explosion released 109 tons of radioactive gases into the atmosphere. So again, these are more images of the explosion afterwards. Radioactive fallout scattered much over the northern hemisphere via the winds and storm patterns. So after the explosion happened, all of these radioactive gases were in the air and they were moved towards the northern hemisphere because of the storms that were in the area and because of the wind pattern. So this is a thematic map that shows you the movement of the radioactive fallout after the Chernobyl disaster. 70% of the radioactive material was blown into the neighboring country of Belarus. In all 150 square kilometers in Belarus, Russia, and Ukraine were contaminated. So this is another thematic map that shows you how much of the area was contaminated with radioactive fallout. So that you can see a very good chunk of the European area was contaminated with radioactive fallout. 70 million people living in these areas were exposed to radioactive fallout. The evacuation. The morning after the explosion, there was no hint of disaster. Children went to school and were playing outside. Gardeners worked in their plots out and outdoors. Even weddings took place that Saturday night. It wasn't only until the second day after the disaster, 36 hours, did the Soviet authorities start evacuating people from the area and around Chernobyl. The Soviet government did not want the people to know what had just happened because of the embarrassment or because they did not want there to create a mass panic. In total, some 200,000 people are believed to have been relocated as a result of the accident. So, over 200,000 people were moved out of the area and sent to live somewhere else because of the Chernobyl disaster. 3 million of those evacuated were children. Human casualties. The immediate impact. Hundreds of villages became too dangerous to live in, forcing over 400,000 people to evacuate their homes and never return. Remember how we talked about yesterday how this area was contaminated with radioactive material and people were no longer able to come back home. So over 400,000 people were not allowed to come back to their homes because of the radioactive fallout. The immediate casualties or the immediate deaths were the operators, rescue workers, firefighters, soldiers involved in the cleanup operations. So the people that showed up first, the first responders, were the ones that were first to die of this radioactive fallout. 31 emergency cleanup workers died in 3 months of the radioactive poisoning. So 3 months after, 31 workers died. 134 emergency workers suffered from acute radiation sickness. So acute means a little or a small amount. So 134 people had a couple of complications because of the radioactive sickness. 25,000, of the rescue workers later died from the diseases caused by radiation. So after some time, 25,000 rescue workers died. Some of the diseases caused by radiation include lung cancer, leukemia, and cardiovascular diseases. Cardiovascular diseases means diseases of the heart. Long-term exposure. How radiation is absorbed: it gets into the atmosphere, it lands on the ground, animals graze on a contaminated land, so the animals eat this area, eat the grass that's been contaminated. Meat and dairy products come contaminated, crops grown are contaminated, and people eat the contaminated food. So these are some of the ways that radiation is absorbed into the people. 8 years after the accident, 8,000 people had died from the diseases due to radiation. In the years following the accident, hundreds of children developed thyroid cancer, which is previously very rare. Thousands more will develop this cancer in the future. Most cases of cancer, leukemia, and other blood diseases in young children and babies. So they started to become more common in children that were affected in this area. And 80% of increased children born with disabilities and deformities in contaminated regions. So 80% of this began to increase. So this is an image of a child that was born without any arms. To date, medical statistics reported 270,000 cancer, mostly thyroid, caused by the Chernobyl disaster. Of these, 93,000 of these cancers were fatal. So 93,000 people died of cancer because of the radioactive fallout. There has been at least 1,800 documented cases of thyroid cancer in children. Again, this is very, very uncommon. It is very rare for children to develop lung cancer, but because of the radioactive fallout, this became more common. In the region of Bolivia's incidence of leukemia has increased 50% in children and adults. So in this country, the cases or the amount of people that have leukemia has increased by 50% in both children and adults. Maternal exposure to radiation causes an increased rate of, so mothers that were exposed to the radioactive fallout, the children were being born with birth defects, miscarriages, meaning that the mothers were not able to have the babies inside them for the entire 9 months, and stillbirths, meaning that the babies were born but they were not born alive. So this is another image of a child that was born with a deformity. Environmental impact. So this beautiful country will remain contaminated for generations to come. So all of this area is still contaminated with radioactive. Areas still impacted today: the soil, water, air, crops and food, and livestock. All of these areas are still, till this day, contaminated with radioactive fallout. 20% of the prime farmland in Bolivar remains contaminated from the decaying components of the plutonium. So this area is still contaminated. The farmland, 20% of the farmland is still contaminated, so it cannot be used for farming. Radiation is concentrated in sediments at the bottom of lakes and ponds. So where this is the area that you're going to be finding the most radioactive material, that is located in the bottom of the lakes and ponds. Still, populations continue to contaminate itself by fishing there. Livestock such as cattle and goats accumulate radioactivity in their meat and milk. So their milk and the meat that they are still contaminated, and people are still consuming this contaminated materials. Food and water supply is continuously contaminated by rainfall and the movement of radioactive dust. Problems today. After the disaster, a huge cement box or sarcophagus was built around the radioactive material. So this area was completely surrounded by this cement box to keep all the material inside, as seen in the picture in the bottom. According to the 2003 report by the Russian Atomic Energy Ministry, the concrete shell surrounding the Chernobyl nuclear reactor was in real danger of collapsing at any time. So again, you see another image of the Chernobyl power plant, and they have built the cement box to keep all of the radioactive material inside. A new shelter, a 1.3 million euro project, was completed in 2009. So in 2009, they finished creating this new shelter to keep radioactive material inside. It is hoped to safely contain the nuclear material for the next 100 years. I'm not sure if you guys were able to hear because the slide might have been cut off, but they created a new box to keep all of the contaminated material inside the Chernobyl factory. So it's hoped that this area will be closed for the next 100 years. The radioactive materials will stay inside. 97% of the radioactive materials from the Chernobyl plant still remain inside the sarcophagus. Even if people are aware of the dangers, many have returned to live in their old homes. So even though they're aware of the dangers, they're aware of the risks that are associated with living there, they still return back to their homes. Today, 5.5 million people still live in contaminated areas. So 5.5 million have returned back to their homes and continue to live in this contaminated area. They continue to be exposed to low doses of radiation for decades to come. So this concludes today's presentation. It is a lengthy presentation, guys. I don't expect you guys to remember all of this information. Most of this information is just so you guys can have the knowledge of what happened in the Chernobyl disaster, why it led to what happened and why it led to the Chernobyl disaster. If you guys have any questions, go ahead and write them down and ask them tomorrow in class. Again, thank you guys for listening to these presentations, and if you guys need anything, feel free to contact me.